Good evening. We are going to call the May 13th meeting of the Sacramento County Planning Commission to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Hom?
Here.
Pulley? Here. Shelby?
Here.
Tatishi?
Here.
Martinson?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Great. I see a lot of folks here in the audience tonight. Welcome. If you are interested in speaking, you will need to sign in on the iPad in the back. So we have your speaker card up here. And for those that are interested in speaking, we'll swear you all in now. So please stand and our clerk will swear you in.
Please raise your right hand, and the appropriate response is, I do. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give this commission is the truth, so help you God? If you do not swear, do you so affirm? When you go to the podium, please state your name for the record and the statement, I have been sworn.
And just a reminder I only have one speaker signed up. So for all those that stood up, please go back to the back and sign in so we have you in the queue. Okay, great. We'll get started and call our first item.
Item number 1, PLER 2019-00030, review of Sacramento County's 2019-20 5-year capital improvement plan.
Good evening, Chair Martinson and Planning Commissioners. You know me, I'm John Lundgren with the Long Range Section of Planning and Environmental Review. This is our annual visit to cover the 5-year capital improvement plan. And you have a big agenda tonight, and I'll cut to the chase. We've found that the additions to the capital improvement plan are consistent with the general plan. And if you would like, I can forward this presentation to our recommendation.
You guys want a presentation?
I just have one question. So I was looking at the for Mather, and I thought I read recently that there's some major capital improvements coming along on some of the hangars. Is that not part of this? Our 5-year improvement plan?
You said out at Mather.
Yep.
I didn't
Airport.
understand what you said. Can you say that again?
So I'm looking at our 5-year capital improvement plan. So I didn't see anything around. I thought I read that there was some development going to happen at the airport as well. Is that not included here, or is that a whole different project altogether?
So there are some development projects for the county airport system, but you might be referring to the Mather South Community Master Plan that's been in the news lately.
No, I thought I saw something on there's some developments on the airport. Is that not included? So go ahead.
I'm not sure. It perhaps might not be in the capital improvement plan. There's certainly some private development activity. We've been working on a couple of different proposals from SacJet for investments out at Mather. But I'm not sure of any public investment projects that are in the current capital improvement program out at Mather.
Okay, maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's private, not public.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
What's the pleasure of the commissioners? Do you want a brief overview or just go straight to the recommendation?
That's the question I had.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, we looked at all the additions to the plan, and they were consistent with the general plan where guidance was provided. And so our recommendation is that you adopt the resolution that we've provided, that we are consistent, and then direct county executive staff to report this back to the Board of Supervisors for their June budget hearings.
Any other questions? I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion for staff recommendations.
Second.
Please vote.
Unanimous vote.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Item number 2, PLNP 2018-00125, use permit and design review, Summit BHC Sacramento LLC. Applicant is Holloway Land Company, Inc., located at 2221 Fair Oaks Boulevard in the Arden Arcade community. Environmental dock is exempt.
Just give me 1 second here. Good evening. My name is Nishant Sioni. Thomas Vogt is the lead planner for this project, but I'll be presenting it on his behalf. We have a presentation prepared if you like, otherwise we can just go straight to the key points.
Key points?
I can't hear.
Are you good with key points,
Yes.
folks? Okay.
Okay.
Let's go with that.
So the final hearing authority is the Planning Commission. It's a fairly straightforward project. There's no exterior improvements or changes proposed. The use is existing and has been operating since 2014. The applicant is currently requesting to legalize that use. Under the use permit, we caught this during the business license process. It was permitted originally without a use permit. Now we're correcting that issue. The center will have a maximum capacity of 48 beds, and the only changes to the site are going to be a shed that is currently non-conforming with development standards, and that's going to be removed. And staff is recommending approval.
Any questions of staff?
I just have one question. So there's no improvements being proposed, correct?
Right. No changes.
Great. We'll bring the applicant up.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, Brian Holloway, Holloway Land Company, representing Valor Recovery. We're pleased to bring this project to you and resolve this issue with the use permit, and I'm here ready for any questions you may have.
Full disclosure, Mr. Holloway and I met. He answered all of my questions, and it looks like the project was existing. It's a matter of getting it up to compliance with the code, right?
Right.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
have no further questions.
Yeah, normally
Thank you.
when we filed for our business license, we would have been notified that we needed a use permit. And what happened was, although planning did tell the business license folks, hey, they need a use permit, the business license folks kindly sent us a business license. And so it wasn't, we didn't know we had an issue until we went in to talk about adding a small modular building for storage, and the planning said, hey, you need a use permit. So we filed right away.
Thank
And
you.
the nice thing was the county said, look, if you had filed in 2014, your fee would have been less than today. And so we got a discount. We got to file under the old 2014 fee rate. Doesn't happen very often. So thank you, planning,
Yeah,
for
this
that.
is good.
Great.
That's it?
Yep.
I'd like to make a motion unless we have discussion.
Sure.
I'd like to move to approve staff's recommendations as written.
Second.
Please vote.
Unanimous vote.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Next item, please.
Next item is item number 3, PLMP 2018-00063, tentative parcel map, special development permit and permit amendment and design review. EDM Realty Group. Applicant is Coat Design Works, located at southeast corner of Watt Avenue and El Camino Avenue in the Arden Arcade community. Environmental document is negative declaration.
Thank you. Would the Planning Commission like to hear the presentation? Otherwise, I will just summarize the key points.
I'm good with key points.
Yep. Okay, key points, please.
Okay, so thank you. This is the Country Club Plaza Shopping Center. It is a portion of it, so the entitlements that you will be deciding on are a special development permit amendment, a tentative parcel map, and design review. The proposed parcels and the development will continue to use the existing driveways and signage. We will require reciprocal access agreements. The arched entry feature at the courtyard entrance between buildings A and C was approved as part of the previous permit. It is going to be moved to become 2 freestanding entry features along the drive aisle from Watt Avenue. This is due to the existing utilities that are located in that area. The former Macy's building on parcel 1 will remain unchanged exterior-wise. otherwise, and no tenant has been identified as part of this project. A portion of the concrete walkway, which is along the north side of the building, will be replaced with 17 parking spaces, 7 accessible, some motorcycle, and then as part of that, we will get some updated landscape planters, but this shouldn't fundamentally change the building. The environmental document that was prepared for this was a negative declaration, and it did not find any potentially significant impacts, and no mitigation is proposed. So staff does recommend that you find the environmental document adequate and adopt it, and that you approve the tentative parcel map, the special development permit amendment, and that you find the design in substantial compliance with the countywide design guidelines. Thank you.
Any questions of staff?
I have some questions for Leanne.
Sure.
Good evening, Leanne.
Good evening, Commissioner Hall.
I remember reviewing this project on the, I guess, the other half of the center a couple of years ago. So the parcel, the Macy's parcel is a standalone parcel, correct?
Yes. So currently, there's actually the 2 parcels involved in this. It's the Macy's parcel and one other, but they largely consist of the north portion of Country Club Plaza Shopping Center.
Okay. So the, because I can't remember when we looked at in 2017, the net parking, since we're adding new pads, does the parking count meet zoning code, or is there a variance being asked for here? I didn't notice when.
That's part of the special development permit amendment, because in the item that you heard, which was a 2017 application, but you heard it in 2017, it looked at the entirety of the shopping center and counted those parking spaces. So that's one of the reasons why you're back with the special development permit amendment, because it was modifying the parking count. So we did go through and do an entire recalculation of the parking based upon all the uses that are proposed and everything, and they do meet our standards.
Okay. And we meet the 50% shading and all that?
Yes, they meet the 50% shading.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Great. Bring the applicant up.
Good evening, Mark Marvelli, COAC Design Works. I'm the architect for the project.
And you accept all the conditions?
Yes, I've read all of the conditions. We've been through them with PRC back and forth. We're in agreement, total agreement with everything, so we're fine.
Any questions of the applicant? Okay, thank you very much. I do see one public comment card, Kathy Strickland, for item 3.
Hi there. I'm not a public speaker unless I really know my stuff, so bear with me. I am Kathy Strickland. I live in Arden Arcade. I'm the research historian for Vintage Arden Arcade and Classic Carmichael. Yesterday I spent about 4 hours at a 1903 Norwegian farm in Carmichael, which it's a fascinating job. I'm not here to say that this should not be done. Instead, I'm here to beg the board to consider some options to construction. The Macy's, well, actually it's the Weinstocks-Lubin building. I call it that because that's what it was originally. The building is an extraordinary example of mid-century modern construction in just pristine condition. The outside aluminum screen alone is just an amazing piece. When I looked at the pictures of this, I saw that the buildings were just rectangle, not a lot of consideration to design. And I don't mean that in an unkind way, but perhaps they could have some shed roof put on them to give them a mid-century look. And perhaps and this is a big one, but if they could be moved closer to the credit union, Safe Credit Union, and then around Butano, which has become a destination street because people go that way to get to the theaters. So if they could move the construction away from the northwest corner just a little, and then down Butano, it wouldn't cover the Macy's building. The problem happens with, we'll go back to Sam's, which is now one of 3 historic Hofbraus left on the West Coast. It was basically covered up by Popeye's chicken. It was something that people from all over Sacramento talk about going to Sam's. It was kind of like a slap in the face to history to have it just covered up. So that's basically what I would like to see. I would also like to address to the builders that they consider with the Weinstock-Lubin building, perhaps a downtown Los Angeles market on the first floor. It would be a very unique design. It would bring in destination. It would become a destination point for people, shoppers. It would be just, there's one in Napa that's just extraordinary, and this is a perfect spot for such a thing. There are 9 mid-century modern buildings at that corner within a 2-block circumference. The character of these buildings is really what continues to make Arden Arcade special. When Harv's decided to go into the Magic Minute Car Wash from 1953 on Arden Way, I got into contact with Harv and I said, Harv, please keep the spires. Harv is keeping the spires. So it doesn't take much to keep the community's character unique. I ask you, I plead with you, I beg you, please, don't let this go in quite as it is. Respect the Weinstock-Lubin building, okay? Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate your input. I don't see any other public comment out there, so I'll close the public comment period. Comments from commissioners or motions?
You know, I would like to address, Ms. Strickland, your comments, and I think it's wonderful that the community, especially people like you, are aware of the history of the area and the what's precious in our architecture. I think it's somewhat unfortunate because this project has gone through just countless hours, not just as a project, but with design review and making sure that it fits into the community. And so for me, I'm going to wind up wanting to approve the project as it is. But I hope that you'll be diligent on future projects in terms of being there a little bit earlier. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Thoughts? Motions?
I'd like to, Peter, your
I was
turn.
going to just make a motion to approve the staff recommendation.
Second.
Please vote.
Unanimous vote.
Our next item, please.
Item number 4, PLMP 2018-00042, tentative subdivision map, special development permit, and design review. Sharon C. Van Fossen et al. Applicant, Vintage Homestead LLC, located at 8021 Ayahuasca Way in the South Sacramento community. Environmental dock is a negative declaration.
If you give us just a quick minute, we're trying to pull up, we're having some problems with the PowerPoint.
So we may not actually be able to pull up the key points slide, but if you want to go through the full presentation, we can. Otherwise, we can just go straight to key points.
I think we're on a key point roll, right? Yep. Okay.
Okay. They are actually in the staff report in front of you if you want to look at the text itself. So this project is an 11-lot subdivision map. It is intended to complete the neighborhood created by another previously approved subdivision map to the west, known as Carlisle Estates Unit 1. This is Carlisle Estates Unit 2. The applicant is proposing 11 lots, which is a density increase above what's allowed under development standards. They are accomplishing this by applying for a special development permit, which allows for density increases with the incorporation of energy efficient design, as long as that percentage increase in energy efficient design is the same as the percentage increase in density. The applicant is proposing to use solar panels, which will result in a 33% energy savings, and are requesting a 20% increase in density. Despite the increase in density, the parcel sizes are consistent and in conformance with RD5 standards and the surrounding neighborhood, including the subdivision map that it's a partner to. The project is in the South Sacramento Habitat Conservation Plan. Staff did conduct and create a negative declaration. Environmental impacts are going to be less than significant with mitigation. The South Sacramento CPAC recommended approval of the project, and the Design Review Advisory Committee recommended that the project be found in compliance with design guidelines, and staff is recommending approval.
Any questions of staff? No. I'll just say I appreciate the staff report and the innovative approach to including a little bit higher density, but energy conservation as well. Happy to see that. We'll call the applicant up.
Kent Baker with Baker Williams Engineering Group, and we have no problems with any of the conditions proposed.
Great.
I just have a question.
Yep, go ahead.
Hi, Kent. Quick question. Vernopol litigation?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't get to ask staff that question, but how are we resolving that? Vernopol litigation?
Paid for it.
Okay, got it.
Great. I do not see any public comment for this item. Any thoughts, comments, or motions?
Move to approve staff recommendations as written.
I'll second. Oh. I'll second. Please vote.
Unanimous vote. Item number 5 is PLMP 2018-00327. Workshop for zoning code amendments related to wireless communication facilities. Applicant is the County of Sacramento Office of Planning and Environmental Review. Environmental document is not applicable.
Good luck.
Okay, good evening, Commissioners. Jessica Brandt with the Planning and Environmental Review. I am here to provide a presentation to kick off tonight's workshop on wireless communication facility zoning code amendments. You do not get a key points thing from me. You have to sit through the whole thing. We do have, before I start my presentation, I do want to note that representatives from the County Department of Transportation and I believe real estate, I don't think she's here yet, but she's planning to be here to answer any questions you might have about their portions of the regulatory process when it comes to wireless communication facilities in the rights of way. And then also, there are a number of wireless industry representatives here, and they will likely want to speak. They may wish to speak longer than 3 minutes, It's at your discretion, of course, but they have put that request in. Some of them may have some materials as far as examples of small cell and other types of wireless facilities as well. And they'll also likely be better technical resources than me. So I'm going to do my best.
May I ask a quick question?
Of course.
Since we're receiving so many communications kind of at the last minute, it's a kind of a fundamental question. Have all of these concerns already been addressed with staff and incorporated into your recommendations, or are some of these new requests and considerations?
So staff put together a draft set of potential zoning code amendments. These aren't recommendations yet. This was sort of where staff had landed as far as sort of a first draft. And we, in order to maintain fairness, we didn't actually meet one-on-one with any representatives. So unfortunately, this was sort of their first kind of crack at looking at what we were going to provide for discussion. I did know that some of the responses, we did receive one, I think, from AT&T, and a lot of their concerns I was anticipating. And so I'll be talking a little bit about some of the, especially development standards, which seems to be mostly what the concerns are about, development standards and design review. I'll be talking about those in the presentation, why staff included them in the discussion draft, and then what are some of the concerns that I've seen from the wireless carriers. My guess is that a lot of the comments will be roughly along similar lines, but I haven't seen a couple of the comment letters that you've received. So I guess that's a long way of saying, I think I'll capture most of it. There might be a few items that are brought up today that I haven't discussed. And that's part of the reason for bringing this as a workshop item to begin with.
And just to clarify too, the action tonight is just to hear the report, hear the discussion, and then direct staff on steps forward.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
My goals, I sort of set up the 4 goals for the workshop tonight. One is to provide an overview of the wireless facility regulatory landscape, just to try to get everyone on the same page. The second is to provide all interested parties equal opportunity to comment on the code updates. Also ground truth the proposed development standards. We did look at a number of jurisdictions and how they have crafted standards. I'd like to say that we were at least in the ballpark, but of course, the industry representatives have more of that technical know-how. And then finally, receiving the feedback from the commissioners on the whole kit and caboodle. So just so we're on the same page, so the Sacramento County zoning code provides use, location, and development standards for all wireless communication facilities in the unincorporated areas of the county. And I won't read this entire definition to you, but a wireless communication facility can be large or small, it can be on its own pole, it can be co-located, but basically it's a high capacity LAN mobile system, guess I will, in which spectrum assigned is divided into discrete channels that are assigned in groups to small geographic cells covering a defined service area. They're regulated both by the FCC and the Public Utilities Commission. Currently, all new wireless facilities require a use permit from the zoning administrator and are subject to development standards based on the zoning category of the proposed location. So a key point in this is that all areas of the county are zoned, even rights of way. And that became a big deal in 2016, 2017. And I'll get to that in a moment. So recent technology and regulatory changes had pushed staff to look at updating our wireless communication facility section of the code. The biggest is the development of what are called small cell facilities. These are also known as 5G networks. These are wireline fiber supporting small cell nodes, which are typically antennas mounted on street poles or other public infrastructure. They provide faster internet speeds than existing technology. However, wireless coverage from these nodes is small, and so providers need to install large numbers to create a reasonable coverage area. There was a recent ruling by the FCC in September of this last year that requires an expedited review of small cell facilities, but they're still considered a wireless communication facility, not a utility, and therefore we still have the ability to regulate the land use of wireless communication facilities, even small cell. More changes that have taken place. There was an earlier change in the FCC regulations where they introduced the concept of eligible facilities, which are modifications or additions to existing cell facilities that fall within certain guidelines. These are eligible for ministerial approval. And so eligible facilities include replacement or additional antennas that result in a tower height increase of either 10% or 20 feet, whichever is greater, new ground equipment within existing lease areas, and other small amendments to existing facilities. Our zoning code currently does not allow for ministerial approval of these eligible facilities, and so a portion of this update has to do with amending that language to be consistent. And that's pretty much all I'm going to say about that, and it's all small cell from here on out. So small cell technology, this is a rendering that was provided by, I'm going to totally butcher this, Vinculums slash AT&T of a small, what's considered a small cell site. And you can see that the antenna, oh, this isn't going to work. The antenna is shrouded at the top of the picture on the left, and then there are small equipment boxes also put. Mouse. Oh, I can use a mouse. Oh yeah, okay. So antenna up here, equipment boxes down here.
Oh, I guess maybe it doesn't work.
Existing pole. Is that? Oh, it's not even working. Ah. Okay. So.
Can I Vanna White it?
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
Here we have the antenna shroud up here and the two equipment boxes here.
So the antenna here is roughly 4 or 5 feet up from the peak of the light post, and then you can see that if there's any additional equipment here, it's either underground or in the pole. So this is sort of the classic example, and I'm sure one that the folks that are here to discuss this will bring up as sort of this is small cell.
I have a quick question. Sure. If you can go back to the picture. So typically when we see larger cell projects, there's backup generators or other sort of box system. Is that what is the equipment box located actually on the light post halfway up, or is that this not showing any type of facility like that?
I don't think this includes that. Do you want to take that?
I can speak on behalf of AT&T. We're not deploying any battery backup or generators that you're referencing. So
okay.
the two radio boxes, that's the typical deployment, along with obviously the antenna shroud at the top.
So he's not on the record right now. He's
yeah.
also not county staff. So you might want to
just hold it.
Draw a distinction between who's
yeah.
doing the presentation right now.
Okay.
Maybe just hold the
we'll
question.
We'll get to you in a minute.
Yes.
Thanks.
Technical expertise over there. Okay. So the County Department of Transportation and Planning began working together in 2016 to develop some sort of by right permitting program for wireless communication facilities and right-of-ways. Transportation had actually started moving towards encroachment permits for some of these facilities before realizing that technically they're a wireless facility, requires a use permit, everything kind of ground to a halt. In addition, there was some 2017 state legislation that would have moved small cell wireless facilities to a utility classification, and so none of us would be having this discussion right now. That legislation did not pass, and unfortunately, staff had halted any movement on this work, assuming that would pass. So we restarted our efforts. We've been coordinating with transportation and the real estate division to try to work on a by right permitting scheme that's coordinated. And again, we have representatives that can speak to the other portions of that permitting as we go through. And again, limited consultation with the providers to retain objectivity. So overview of the proposed updates. Number one is kind of the big daddy. It's the new language to permit the facilities and rights of way if development standards are met. The 2 through 5 are smaller items, adoption of the eligible facility standards per FCC guidelines, an overhaul with formatting, substitution of a special development permit for a higher level use permit when it comes to a facility that's requesting a deviation from standards. That's to be more in line with all of the rest of our deviation allowances. And then there are some minor updates to the development standards for wireless facilities on private property. For instance, we clarified some of the setback requirements from rights of way or from property that's like residential to non-residential. So permitting wireless facilities in the rights of way. So currently, for all wireless facilities in the rights of way, they are required to have a use permit and a design review. All of our wireless facilities go through the design review process. There is, if it's on a county-owned facility, there would be a master lease agreement done through the real estate division. Department of Transportation would issue an encroachment permit, and then they would need a building permit in order to, the encroachment permit takes care of the building permit, right? Sorry.
The encroachment permit is at the right of way.
Yeah, takes care of that. Right. So I apologize. You have the encroachment permit, which would take care of the building permit for facilities on county facilities. Yeah. Oh, Lord. And then if it was on like a PG&E pole or something separate, then it would require a building permit separately. So the proposed permitting process for a new wireless facility in the rights of way that meets development standards would be design review, so the use permit would go away. You could do these in a batch. Right now, everything is per location. You'd still do the master lease agreement if you're dealing with county facilities, encroachment permit, and potentially building permit. Let's see here.
So when I read this, the last slide, it looks like the only change is that we can approve them in batches versus by each location?
They also would not require an entitlement, so they wouldn't require a use permit. So we would allow them ministerially, just through a design review.
So they wouldn't come before us?
Yes. Okay. So this just goes into that in a little more detail. This would be kind of the process that they would come in. They'd enter into that master lease agreement first. They would come in with a design review, likely as a batch or an area, and then there would be the issuance of the encroachment permit. Just make sure I'm not missing anything. So one thing that's come up as a concern with the providers is the requirement that their facilities go through a design review. There's a concern that it doesn't meet the standard of having objective standards as part of the review. We do have some language in our design guidelines that it's at the discretion of the design review administrator we do have the allowance for the design review administrator to move a facility or a project to the design review advisory committee if they feel like they need that extra review. This is, staff still believes that this meets the standard of the FCC regulations because we do have, which is what I provided to the commission, in the commercial design guidelines, we do have a section for wireless communication facilities. This is for all wireless communication facilities in the county. This was already on the books. This is our set of objective or reasonable standards for making sure that the aesthetics of a wireless facility meet our standards. And so there's, I'm assuming there'll be more discussion on that, but I did want to provide the commission with this just so you have this as well. So since the majority of the discussion will likely be around the development standards for the wireless facilities, I tried to go through each kind of major standard and explain the reasoning behind it, and then the options that are available and might be recommended by the operators. So the first proposed standard is a required attachment to existing structures. The reasoning behind this is that it minimizes impacts to right-of-way landscaping, pedestrian and vehicle safety, because the idea is that you're not putting additional poles within the right-of-way. It also minimizes the aesthetic impact of additional poles, and I think this is really key. This allows us to keep this as an exemption under CEQA. Staff believes that allowing the antennas to be placed on existing facilities falls under one of the categorical exemptions in CEQA. If we were to allow additional poles in the right-of-way, that may need another review, and we may need to go through at least an initial study and determine whether that's something that may warrant a larger sort of review. There are options, of course. We can allow new poles. I will note that the small cell facilities or the wireless facilities and right-of-ways can also go through the special development permit, just like all the rest of the wireless facilities that are in the code. And so if they wish to not be a co-located facility, they can come through that special development permit. Of course, then it kicks it into a lot more a use permit and the like. And there are still some shot clock restrictions on that. And so that is a little bit worrisome for staff as well. I think new construction, you have to turn around a review in 120 days. So that could be an issue, but it is an option. We can also restrict size and location too. One thing I did want to address while I'm thinking about it, small cell is a type of wireless facility, but it's not separate from wireless facilities. And so I think I talk about wireless facilities in the right-of-way instead of small cell, partially because I feel like this is not, we're not looking at a whole separate category of facility. This is still, they still use the same, they still are designed the same way to do the same work as other wireless facilities. And so it's trying to pull small cell facilities out ended up to me feeling a little short-sighted. I would like, as the technology evolves, to have it a little more general. And so wireless facilities in the right-of-way, however they evolve, however the Federal Communications Commission defines them, I would like to keep as nimble as possible. So, I know that's come up a couple of times in the responses, was that they'd like to have this be small cell focused. I think this covers small cell without being too narrow. So, I just want to put that out there. Back to development standards. The proposed standard we had for maximum additional height was 5 feet. I am hearing that is too restrictive for standard antenna arrays. It sounds like more like a 6 foot or even a 9 foot would be more applicable to most of the antenna arrays that are out there currently. Again, this was modeled after some other jurisdictions to minimize the aesthetic impacts. I'm not married to this by any means. And so we could certainly increase that if it's necessary for a standard antenna array. This is sort of a worst case scenario when it comes to new poles. This was something that was brought to us as a potential new pole in the right-of-way in 2016. It's about 75 feet tall. I know this isn't fair, I'm sorry. But I just, as far as visuals go, I think it's important to see the need for some level of development standard on here. If there was a move to change small cell and make them into a utility, this could potentially be here anyway. So since we have the ability to regulate, I think we need to take that ability.
But just to stop right there real quickly, but there is the potential if they decide to go the facility through the special development permit, there can be variances associated with that height.
Yeah, I think it would be hard to make the findings necessary for this particular example, but that doesn't mean that you don't have the ability, if it warrants having a deviation for the particular site that you are looking at, to have that. Yeah.
Thank you.
So the next standard is placement of accessory equipment on the pole or underground. This is something that a lot of jurisdictions have required. What they found early on was that large equipment boxes were being placed in the limited amount of landscaping or sidewalk that existed in the right-of-way, causing some concern as far as, again, aesthetics and then also ADA. I don't think that they're being designed like that anymore, but I did want to get it into this set of regulations. Again, there is always the option of placement in the right-of-way or minimizing or allowing only a certain size of equipment on the ground. Again, hearing from the providers whether that's an important component to making their facilities work. This was the last standard here, no attachment on decorative light standards. This was something that the Department of Transportation is really keen on. The county spends a lot of money in certain areas to put up very nice decorative light standards. This is a purely aesthetic reason. There's a potential to allow with more stringent stealth design requirements, but I think this was something that transportation was really concerned about. So the stealth design. When I say stealth, usually I mean shrouds over the antenna array. So like the one on the left, again, has what's called a shroud around it. It's sort of a bin or a box. Concealed wiring, coloring that matches the pole that it's on. The left-hand example meets the standards for stealth. Right-hand example, which is in the city of Sacramento, would not. So this is something that, again, from an aesthetic point of view, really minimizes the impact of these facilities. There could be no stealth requirement. There could be just a coloring requirement with no shroud. There's lots of different options here.
And why is the one on the right? Is it because it's not colored the same as the pole, or same as the?
Yeah. So you see the antennas themselves. So there's no shroud, and then they're also white as opposed to brown. And that's not particularly eye-popping. It's just an example of one that's not stealth. So what would be allowed? I tried to find a couple of examples that if you looked at the standards in the draft set, what could be allowed. I think I put, again, this example that was provided by one of the providers, this would be something that would be allowed. This other example on the right is in front of City Hall, and it has the stealth design with the antenna at the top shrouded and then the equipment boxes on the pole. And so this would be another one that we could allow. So my hope is that for the most part, the set of development standards will meet the needs of providing these facilities. It may not give everyone everything they want, but it kind of meets that balance. So next steps, I'm going to take comments, recommendations, draft a final set of zoning code amendments and bring it back to the commission. My hope is that I bring it back for a recommendation vote on the June 24th meeting. And then the soonest I can bring it to the board is in August. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
I have a question. Thank you. And you'll quickly know how little I understand about this technology.
It's okay, me neither.
So in just quickly reading some of these comments, and I know the applicant and other people from the people from the public will be giving comments, but it appears that the FCC has been somewhat intentional in wanting small cell to have a different cadence in terms of approving and a different criteria for design, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So do you feel like what you're working on is fully in compliance with both what the FCC is stating and the intent of what they're stating?
I believe so. They are definitely pushing small cell, trying to get that 5G network. They want to see it both urban and rural, and so there's a lot of push. That's for sure. But they did leave room for localities to still have some control over the aesthetics and the overall development of the small cell. We certainly can't prohibit. That's a definite no. But we can put reasonable, I think I've seen in a couple of these objective standards, I've also seen reasonable standards. I'm not sure which one is the actual language, but reasonable standards for bringing these in an unobtrusive way. So I think we're meeting a balance. Others may have differing opinions.
So along those lines, would it make sense to specifically call out small cell as its own set of criteria so that you could establish standards in advance versus every time a design comes through, it's subject to being accused of being subjective versus objective. So I'm making this up. For instance, there's 4 designs depending on what's at the site, mm-hmm. And they're pre-approved, and as long as they fall within those, it whizzes through the process. Mm-hmm. Is there a reason we wouldn't want to do that?
No. Yeah.
Oh my God! I had a good idea.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah, and I think as Jessica mentioned during her presentation, I think there's an opportunity, perhaps through design review, to do sort of batch mm-hmm. approvals or pre-approved type of plans that could be used as they seek to deploy them on multiple fixtures or structures throughout the county.
Yeah, in briefly reading this, it certainly looks like the intent of the FCC is to have that where it can be deployed rapidly. I would think it would take less costly staff time as well if that was pre-designed.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Commissioner Shelby?
I think I'll have more for some of the speakers coming up.
I'll jump in real quick. Do agree with my fellow commissioner about potential very standard utility pole or other similar fixtures, but I do appreciate the ability for through a ministerial process for some design review, because obviously the attachment, while the small cell may look similar, that the actual what it's being attached to might not. Mm-hmm. But my question is really focused on some of our zoning overlays. So would this really apply to every district, even if there was a historical zone or special community development area, or is it throughout the entire zoning code, or how does it apply in certain areas where the community has spent time and effort to kind of develop specific standards that respect the look and feel of that community and wanting to develop in that certain way?
What do we do with the current ones? Like in an SBA?
Yeah, so sorry, we're just
It's okay.
chatting. I think the way that we would currently interpret it is that the SPAs would override, or we would look first to the SPAs and then defer to the zoning code standards. And so unless we draft the proposed amendments differently, or something we can look into to see that we would use these standards perhaps rather than the SPA standards, unless there's a really good reason, perhaps in some of the SPAs where there are historic considerations, like maybe Old Florentown or some of those
And I guess the
areas.
decorative lighting component probably covers most of that. Just want to be cognizant of the fact that folks have spent time and trying to, develop certain downtown areas to make sure that those requirements are sort of respected in this process.
Yeah, I think we do lump our SPA and MPA areas into what's called Group 1, which is our strictest standard for new wireless facilities. But as these are co-locations, that's sort of looked at the same across the board.
Okay.
And I don't know if any of our other overlays discuss wireless facilities. Parkway Corridor, I'm trying to think of any others.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
We'll have to look into that.
Yeah, we can look into that more.
And then just a couple quick questions just for my information. Does the county own our utility poles and lease to the utility, or do we rent them? Do you know?
Hardeep, can you come up?
Or Jennifer.
Or Jennifer,
Hello, my name is Hardeep Sidhu. I am here, I work for the county Sacramento Department of Transportation. To answer your question, yes, the street light poles that you see some of the examples earlier, those are owned by the Department of Transportation, yes.
Okay.
And I believe the master license agreement that Jessica talked about, that would be a mechanism of leasing those facilities for deployment of these small cells on the county street light poles.
Okay, thank you. I know it's different depending on the county if you own or you lease that equipment. And then finally, just to give us kind of all a better sense, what is sort of the timeframe process under this proposed process under a ministerial permit versus what a special development permit would be, if you could ballpark that, just so we kind of have an idea of what we're looking at, what's different.
Yeah.
Yeah, currently our special development permits to the zoning administrator are typically averaging between 4 to 6 months or so. A ministerial design review or a non-discretionary design review, depending on submittals or the quality of the submittal materials, are anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks for approval.
So pretty significant
Oh,
difference
yes,
in timeframe.
absolutely. A pretty significant cut in the processing time.
Okay, great, thank you. Other questions?
Jessica? I'm reading McKenzie and Albertson's letter. It refers to a number of places, the Public Utilities Code, Public Utilities Commission, I assume. And you made a statement that it's the county's opinion wireless facilities are not a public utility, correct?
Correct.
That's law.
Okay. Then, because their letter keeps referring to public utilities codes, which may turn out to be not true in this letter?
I don't think so. I do think there are public utility codes that apply to wireless.
But it doesn't apply to
Right.
the wireless. They're throwing out, I don't disagree that they're referencing the code correctly, but it's not applicable.
It may not be applicable.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I have a clear understanding of that.
There are definitely provisions from the Public Utilities Code, the California Public Utilities Code, that apply to telecommunications facilities.
Yeah, they regulate them.
No, I'm not going to go any further and talk about how much the Public Utilities Commission may or may not have authority over these kinds of uses, but there are some code provisions.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
On a lighter note, I think fake trees are just goofy. Ugh.
Duly noted.
That is actually in the design guidelines.
I saw it.
Yeah.
And a palm tree. Wow.
I know.
Okay, we will move to the public comment period. And I have Chris Viegas, and I believe you have a PowerPoint as well.
Yeah, I was told there was an overhead projector, so I printed them out, and then I wanted to use the overhead projector if possible.
Staff, can we accommodate that? And we'll definitely, yeah, we have it.
Have your presentation. Just tell us when to turn the page.
Okay, sure. So, good evening. My name is Chris Viegas. I work for Verizon Wireless at Verizon Wireless. I'm part of the Community Development Department, where we focus on building relationships with the communities that we serve. So I'm here today to talk to you about our deployment plans and also just to provide some feedback on the documents that are before you this evening. So if you'll flip to page 4, I have photographic examples of deployments that we've done. The photo on the left is a 4G design that we deployed in the city of Cupertino. And we worked with the city of Cupertino to come up with a design concept that would conceal the radios that are along the shaft of the pole so that they're concealed from oncoming traffic. And then the photo on the right is a 4G design that we deployed in the city of Santa Rosa. And then we did make a comment on the document as it relates to GO95, and I'll go over that comment, and then I'll show you guys this photo and explain why it's important that we change that or incorporate some language that we're suggesting. On the next page, you'll see our 5G designs. The photo on the left is a streetlight pole that we deployed in the city of Sacramento, and the photo on the left is a streetlight pole that we deployed in the city of Sacramento. And the photo on the right is also in the city of Sacramento. These are both 5G designs. And it's important to note that with 5G design, the equipment is much smaller than with the 4G design. And that's because with the radio and the antenna on 5G, they're incorporated into a single unit as opposed to being separated out. So here you'll see the antenna and the radio are located right in that single unit. And with the 4G design, they're separated out. So as technology advances, the equipment is getting smaller.
And for your plans for like this region, is it mainly 5G deployment that you look going forward from a small cell usage, or what percentage would you kind of forecast going the next 5 years?
Unfortunately, I don't have the percentages, but we would have to begin with the 4G as a base layer, and then we would build off of that. So we would add 5G once the initial layer is there for the 4G.
So still deploying 4G today?
Yes.
5G comes a little bit later.
Future, that's correct.
Okay.
And so you mentioned that our outside legal counsel submitted a letter in response to the draft document that is before you, and there were a number of discrepancies in that document between federal and state law and what is before you this evening. And so I wanted to highlight some of those discrepancies. I won't go into detail for every one, but there were 3 that I wanted to highlight. So first, we would suggest that the FCC's definition of a small cell be incorporated into the document. The FCC definition of a small cell wireless facility can be found in FCC document 18-133 Wireless Infrastructure Order. And that states that wireless facilities, that with a wireless facility, each antenna is no more than 3 cubic feet in volume, and all other equipment is cumulatively no more than 28 cubic feet. It also goes on to state that the structure is 50 feet or less in height and no more than 10% taller than adjacent structures, and is not extended to a height of more than 10% above the pre-existing height. So we would like to see that incorporated into the document. Another proposed change that we would suggest is that as it reads today, the document states that no new poles are in the right-of-way, and we would like to remind Planning Commission as well as planning staff that Public Utilities Code Section 7901 grants telephone corporations such as Verizon Wireless access to the public right-of-way, and we are allowed to erect our own poles to attach wireless facilities within the right-of-way.
And just can I clarify that point with staff, because it's our understanding from your presentation that we do allow new pools. It's just a separate permitting process than what we're talking about today.
Yeah, it would require that special development permit. So if the language is unclear and it makes it sound like it's prohibited, I'll update that for sure.
Thank you.
Excuse me, would that process delay the 60-day requirement that the FCC has put on approval of this?
So I think the FCC requirement for new construction is 120 days, right?
I believe it's 90 days
Is
for
it
a
90
new pole.
days for a new pole?
Mhm.
Okay, so we would need to do a 90-day turnaround. Yeah.
Thank you.
I do have an additional question for you, Jessica, and maybe the applicant, the Verizon representative. One of, from what I understand, the county's preference is if there are existing poles that have attachment capabilities, but say Verizon or whomever the wireless carrier chooses, no, I don't want to attach or do my own pole. What is the county's ability to require that wireless to attach to an existing pole? Because I'm not sure what I'm unclear of. I hear some conflict here in my mind. Somebody's telling me the public utilities code says I can put a pole willy-nilly wherever I want. I have the right to do that. But at the other hand,
Yeah, that's not quite right.
Yeah.
on the other hand,
Yeah, this was the subject. Go ahead.
that it's not a public utility. So, and that's my concern is I'm concerned with, say, there's an impasse and the wireless vendor wants to willy-nilly start. I'm going to stick my pole up in the public right away, whether the county likes it or not.
Yeah, they don't have that right. So Public Utilities Code Section 7901, 7901.1, those do deal with telecommunications facilities. Those code sections were very recently the subject of a California Supreme Court decision which did confirm that local agencies, cities and counties, have the ability to regulate wireless facilities for aesthetic purposes. So, no, it's not an absolute right. The question is, and this whole push and pull that's been going on for 100 years between local agencies and the industry, how much can we regulate? So that's where we have to kind of find out, for the purposes of refining this ordinance, how much do you guys and the board want to allow or not allow in the right of way, and is that going to be consistent with this Supreme Court decision? So we'll be continuing to work on that and refine that.
Thank you.
Okay, continue.
Perfect. And then
Thank
to that point, we would suggest that a reasonable standard be incorporated, and that would be to allow new poles if there is no existing structure within 200 feet along the subject right-of-way that is available and technically feasible to support a small cell.
Excuse me, how many small cells can be put on a single pole if we have 20 different telecom providers that want to do that?
Ideally, we would like one carrier per pole. That is,
So the 200 feet would have to include a pole that's open and free to have the ability, you could have a pole within 200 feet that somebody else is using.
yes.
Thank
So
you.
we would, if there was a pole that somebody was using and there was no other poles along that right-of-way, and we were more than 200 feet away, then we would like to install our own pole there, rather than attaching or having multiple carriers on a single pole.
Thank you.
And then the last request that I would like to go over is that of height increase limits. General or Public Utilities Commission GO 95 requires antennas and associated equipment, including the mounting brackets, be elevated 6 feet above pole top electric supply conductors. So this is necessary in order to deploy a wood pole design. Otherwise, it would be technically infeasible. because of GO 95 requirements. So we would like to have that height be increased from 5 feet to 6 feet at the very least.
Oh, an overall 6 foot?
Yes.
Okay.
We did work with the city of Rockland on the same one, and they agreed to extend it to 10 feet. If that's something that the county would be willing to entertain, then we would certainly appreciate that. That's all that I have. Beyond that, I just had general information about 5G that was included in the package that I provided. If you guys have any questions,
Great.
I'm here to answer them. Again, my name is Chris Villegas, and thank you for your time.
Appreciate your input. I do not have any other public speakers on my list. Oh, I do not have you on my list, but you can come up, and I believe you were sworn in, so you can just state your name for the record.
Forgive me, Matthew Yurgevich, here for AT&T. I did fill out the iPad form.
Having some technical difficulties,
No
apparently.
worries. So I work for a company called Vinculum Services. We are AT&T's developer in this market, so we do the permitting, we do the construction, and we're working on the master license agreement with the county to use the county's proprietary infrastructure. We've been pursuing these ordinance amendments and master license agreement for almost 2 years. We're very grateful for this being proposed before you today, and glad that it's culminating in essentially a good zoning code amendment. It's a good one. We have a few comments, largely echoing Verizon's, and want to make some clarifications about those. But first and foremost, wanted to express our appreciation and gratefulness for this going through. We look forward to the ongoing opportunity to provide feedback. I think a lot of these discussions can be hashed out in a conference room or by email or over the phone when it gets to the nitty-gritty of the code. I want to reference the comment letter that was submitted today by AT&T's outside counsel, Porter Wright. Those comments are AT&T's thorough official comments as it pertains to the code. We can leave off copies. I believe Alice Perez here, who's AT&T employee, external affairs representative, I believe she dropped some off as well. Again, they're generally, we're dealing with a good zoning code amendment. But I just want to highlight some of the items that just won't work for small cells, and I think have unintended consequences. First, to clarify the 5-foot height limitation. So, state of California sets forth the GO 95 that Chris was referencing, a 6-foot power separation. That is, if wireless facilities are attached to a utility pole above power, they have to be at least 6 feet above that power. And that's measured to the bottom of the attachment bracket. So when you have the bayonet bracket itself, the antenna itself, the mounting facility, perhaps a shroud to conceal the cabling and everything else, it comes out to be 10 feet, really. Sometimes even 12 feet, because if you need to, girth up the pole, those poles are manufactured in increments of 5 feet. So, you go up incrementally, by 5 feet. So, we would definitely, to be able to use utility poles, we would need at least 10 feet in order to do so.
So wait, can I stop you right there quickly? So if typical utility poles are about 5, you're saying you need an additional 5 feet for the shroud on top of it?
No. So let's say you have a 30-foot utility pole, right? And it's got power at the tippy top, right at 30 feet. State of California, which regulates wireless, sets forth engineering requirements, affectionately referred to as GO 95. Mm-hmm. They say you have to go, if you're going to go above power, you got to provide 6 feet of separation. So the bottom, what they do is they install
from the light to the top of
they install a bracket, like a wooden bayonet on top. That all it does is maintain that separation, and then on top of that bracket, they put the antenna. And the bottom of that antenna bracket has to be 6 feet away from the power line. So, a 5-foot height extension, the unintended consequence of that would be, the industry would try to engage in side mounts. They'd probably try to find, those poles with space in the communication zone where you could attach side mounts. You might not be able to use poles at all because you wouldn't be able to extend the height. So they'd be looking for, areas where they could deploy new poles, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of unintended consequences. If it was changed to a preference, perhaps, where, the county prefers that the height is limited to, whatever is technically feasible, that might be better language. We could work that out, as we may. But any other questions as to the height stuff?
I'm just a little confused as to some of the designs we've seen versus what you're indicating, and what sort of the side box we've seen in multiple, both the previous gentleman speaker and from staff, shrouds that don't look 6 feet, but then there's also a utility, a small concealed box, essentially mid-pole. So if those, it just doesn't sound like it's driving with what you're saying, so.
Okay, so there are two aspects to any small cell. Totally, I guess, breaking it down. You have the antenna portion, which typically needs, some degree of height. And then you have the radio portions, the backpacks, I guess they're about backpack sized. And those are the portions I think you referenced that are mounted
those
much
are the
lower.
mid-poles,
yeah, much lower on the pole.
And what is the requirement from the power source? And the power source, I'm assuming, is at the light fixture?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're generally speaking, what we're talking about here are wooden utility poles is kind of the first, generally speaking, type of infrastructure we're talking about. And then light poles, typically county-owned light poles. If it's a county-owned light pole, then we need to establish a master license agreement to use the county's proprietary infrastructure. And that was another comment that I had, I guess, that the master license agreement would only be required for the use of such light poles. Of course, the industry already has the right to attach to the utility poles because they work through the Northern California Joint Pole Association. They essentially own the portion of the pole to which they attach. For the portions that are above power or in the power zone, they have agreements with the power providers to use that space. So it's a complicated scenario.
But the master license agreement is for essentially the real estate transaction for the utility or the poles that the county actually owns that we are allowing you to co-locate on.
Exactly. And typically that agreement would allow for the industry to use the house power, to use the power lines and conduit within the pole. That's the best case scenario. And we could talk about that, I think, with staff, showing engineering examples, and that's not before you today, but there are a lot of things that can be included in the master license agreement, including pre-approved designs. I know that this was mentioned by the commission tonight, wanting an opportunity for pre-approved designs. Pre-approved designs could be attached as exhibits to the master license agreement so that the county knows exactly what it's going to get. But as it pertains to the code, the requirement for a master license agreement should only apply to the use of county infrastructure. New poles, I know there's been a lot of discussion about new poles, and the T-Mobile versus San Francisco case was properly referenced. I guess just briefly to put in my 2 cents about that. Section 7901 does cover, it's undisputed, covers wireless facilities. But does, of course, as was stated, allow the local jurisdictions the aesthetic controls within their time, place, and manner restrictions under 7901. So from a hands-on experience, submitting permit applications, getting permit applications approved, I can tell you that in a lot of instances, there are residents in working with the community who would prefer a new pole rather than even the use of an existing utility pole or light pole that might be in front of their home, for example. They want the wireless service. This is the service that's providing them with not only coverage, but also capacity. Everybody these days has a smartphone, and you get off work at 5 p.m. and everybody opens up their smartphone, and suddenly you can't use your device every way that you would expect to do. That's why these small cells are being deployed in large part to address these coverage and capacity concerns. And the new poles, people largely want the service. New poles are a great solution sometimes to provide the service when folks don't want co-located facilities on utility poles or light poles in front of their home, for example. So I think to punish the industry and to require a heightened process not only runs the risk of exceeding the 90-day shot clock that was set forth by the FCC, but it also, I think, thwarts what some residents might want. New poles. To clarify AT&T's deployment, as I mentioned briefly, AT&T is not deploying ground boxes, as it were. Ideally, AT&T wants to leverage existing infrastructure. The deployment would be consistent in large part with the City of Sacramento deployment. These facilities the deployment is happening as we speak in the City of Sacramento. If you walk outside, I'm sure, if you examine, the light poles within a block or two, you would see some small cells already. There are thousands, I dare say, definitely hundreds deployed in places like San Francisco and other select markets in Northern California. In Sacramento County, we have funded facilities. That means facilities that we would submit applications for today if we could. So we're definitely grateful for this zoning code amendment.
Excuse me, I have two quick questions if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
The first is, how are these powered? Are they powered through underground electricity, or are they battery?
So they're powered through the usually existing power that's in the public right-of-way. The nice thing about leveraging the public right-of-way is you already have the utilities there. You have power and you have land-based telephone service. And you need those things to plug into the small cells. So when it comes to a light pole, we're able to use that same power line that's powering the light itself.
So the county's light bill is subsidizing then the...
No, there are
not an issue for me. I'm just wondering how it works.
In the county, it's a little bit complicated because I believe there are PG&E areas of the county and there are SMUD areas of the county. And PG&E and SMUD, they handle things differently. SMUD has a flat rate. So SMUD entered into an agreement with the City of Sacramento, for example, whereby, and AT&T and the carriers consented to this agreement, whereby the carriers are using the city power lines, the circuits to the light poles, and the carriers pay a flat rate. It's an assumed rate to SMUD. With PG&E jurisdictions, again, we're talking about light poles. PG&E prefers for the industry to use the existing power circuits, and if the jurisdiction, the infrastructure owner allows for that, then we deploy a small hockey puck-sized meter that goes below the antenna, fully concealed within the antenna shroud, and it captures the exact amount of power that's used. So that's the best case scenario. If a jurisdiction, for whatever reason, does not want the industry to use the power circuits, then PG&E requires the deployment of a ground-mounted meter. So again, use of the jurisdiction, light pole, power, and conduit is critical.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Anybody else? I don't see anybody on my list, so just checking. Okay, we will close the public comment period. have some discussion. So I believe what you need from us tonight is some direction on what you've proposed, maybe thoughts on the conversation, and the next steps are, before we start that, will be to then sort of incorporate that into the draft, and then will it come back, or will it go to the board, or what's that?
Yeah, so whatever comments the commission may have tonight, especially if it's something that sounds like a good number of you are interested in seeing incorporated into the draft, then I can take that back, incorporate it in, and bring it back. This time it would be for a recommendation vote.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I do want to say that Jennifer Classe from Real Estate Division is here in case you had any master lease agreement questions.
Great, thank you. Does anyone, Mr. Shelby,
Yeah, sure. Hearing the testimony, I mean, I'm okay going past the 6 feet. I don't know where it exactly ended yet, so I probably would suggest having some more conversation with the industry on what makes sense here, so it doesn't get out of control. But maybe we come back and we can. I'm open to having a discussion about where we draw the line at, but I'm definitely open to going past 6 feet. So I'm okay with that. I think they give valid reason for us to go consider that. That's probably the main thing that I came across. And I also agree with your thoughts of separating the two. Right?
Thank you.
So.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, so I would like to reiterate that I think based on what the FCC is demanding of timeframes, if you could separate, and this may be the wrong word, but make it its own, and put together design options that allow it to be fast-tracked through administrative review, I think we would meet the intent and the letter of the FCC requirement. And again, I think it would reduce staff time dramatically if it stays bundled or commingled with other kinds of wireless decisions. It becomes less clear, and clearly the industry is moving toward 5G rapidly, so that'll probably be the bulk of what you see in terms of requests. And there was one other. We had a lot of discussion about new poles. I don't understand that topic well enough, but it sounds like, and I don't know if that's part of the FCC's 60-day, 90-day criteria. I think it would be important to know that. If it is part of that, then again, I would recommend we get more finite about those criteria, because I suspect once this is done, the industry is going to give you bundles of requests, and it just seems to me this would be a faster and better way to do it. I'm also concerned with the letter from AT&T. The tone of it is, in essence, to us, it sounds somewhat like the idea that the county doesn't really have any discretion at all, and I don't get the impression that that's fully accurate. So it may be good to call out where we do have discretion, so it's clear, especially as planning commissioners, as we deliberate. Thank you.
Can I follow up real quick? So on separating the small cell, so the thought being that we would adopt, like for instance, the FCC small cell definition, like the providers were talking about. Would the commission want to see only facilities that meet that definition be allowed in the right-of-ways by right, or still allow other types of wireless facilities in the right-of-way?
And we're talking basically about 4G versus 5G.
Well, it's more than just 4G or 5G, though, right? Because small cell, they're going to deploy small cell for 4G as well. So it's beyond this.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, I think it would be a case-by-case basis. I don't think we take the right away. I think if someone looks at a pole on a right of way, I think we would definitely want to bring that here. But I think your comments were, how do we try to streamline the process for some of these small cells, because we need to get capability for people to get access to the internet. That is critical. I think these are pretty good designs, so they kind of sneak into I think our neighborhoods pretty well. So I think I just kind of like this direction versus mounting poles and mounting antennas on top of everything. So I think anything we can do to go help that process, we should try to do that.
I guess
So
I'm
just to
unclear,
interject, Commissioner Polly, at least the way that our code reads and the way that those shot clock requirements work is that they're the same, no matter if it's the small cell or if it's the more traditional poles that we see. The timing requirements are the same. So I think as we drafted the proposed amendments, we didn't differentiate between the two because our requirements are the same, and we're not proposing a different process as a result of it.
So thank you, and help me understand a little bit better then. So if it's the same regardless of whether it's small cell or, for lack of a better word, large cell, and the requirements are the same, what are we doing in the new code to ensure we can do a 60-day turnaround?
Okay, so you're looking more for trying to get that efficiency built in.
My concern is the
Yeah.
FCC, it looks so not only clear but strong in their wording that that's their intent. And so I don't want to do your job because I don't know how to do your job. But it seems to me if you're able to come up with really clear options, and they say these 15 locations meet option 1, these 12 locations meet option 2, and they hand you the package with all of those, that it could go much faster.
So that would, and a lot of jurisdictions do it that way, where it is truly just through a master lease agreement and an encroachment permit. And that is an option. It is an option.
Wouldn't that negate any type of design or aesthetic review?
Other than creation of the initial set.
Other than that first standard.
But that would be more for the kind of handing over to transportation or real estate. And then I think part of the discussions internally was that those two departments didn't feel as comfortable reviewing aesthetic type of criteria for these sorts of facilities. And so it ended up coming back as a review prior to the full implementation. So review by planning.
So other jurisdictions have sort of, if you fall into category A, B, or C, for example, and you look like the standards, then it's just if you need a master lease agreement, and then what's the other process?
An encroachment
permit. And then there is a process potentially, though, if you don't, because I guess that's I tend to agree with you both that most of these are probably going to be deployed in our neighborhoods in a similar capacity and similar sort of fashion. But I want to preserve the right, because it's our legal ability to regulate for certain aesthetics or design review or things that may fall out of those potentially draft categories. Is that something that other places have done, or we have the ability, you see, to do that?
Yes, to both. Some jurisdictions do have some sort of administrative review through their planning or design review. Sometimes it's through the Public Works Department, sometimes through their transportation department. It seems like it's sort of all over the map when it comes to this sort of review. I think we set it up this way after consultation internally. I do think that we could still do the batch reviews, especially if they come in as a standardized set, and then that should move them through the process fairly quickly. I share your concern about the turnaround times. They are very tight.
Yeah.
Very tight. Yeah.
So, is there a mechanism then, thank you, to your point, is there a mechanism to say, here are your 4 options, we reserve the right if something either should deviate or it's an unusually sensitive area to pull that out as an exception, or if it's in code, those are the 4 options and we're stuck with them? It was a really legal way to say that, thank you.
I kind of jotted down the potential for looking at this in sort of 3 levels, which is that the no design review, you would go straight to the encroachment permit and master lease agreement, and that's the potential for meeting an established set of guidelines. It's very straightforward. You know, your antenna array is so big, it's so tall, it's shrouded or it's not, depending on what we want. Everything is on the pole, and check, 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 and it just goes through. I think I would probably want to bring that back to our partners in transportation and in real estate and see if that's something they would be comfortable including in a master lease agreement or checking off in an encroachment permit. That would be that first level, and then the second level would be if they want to go just a little bit above or a little bit of, you know, they want maybe equipment on the ground or a little larger or they need to go taller. Let's say they need to put that extra bit on the power pole. It wouldn't necessarily need a design or a development deviation. It could come through the design review at that point, and then we could have some specifics related to that. That could capture some of our like special planning areas, neighborhood preservation areas. And then the third would be if they, you know, want a new pole in the right of way, or if they want to go significantly larger, then that would be that special development permit. So that, I mean, that's another way of kind of breaking it up. And so we could probably get the majority of them through that first level. And then the sort of special case ones, we'd still have that ability to look at either design through a design review or a special development permit. That could be maybe a
I'd like to see it. I mean, if they're willing to put that together, I think that would be a good proposal for us to review.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, what we've heard a number of these that aren't through this process, but through our traditional discretionary review process, and we hear from neighbors or folks that live next door, and especially when it comes to new poles, I tend to want to preserve that discretionary ability to have a say. And then if it deviates from what sort of the county has decided is our, you know, preferred method of deployment, then having an additional, maybe not through a discretionary process, but an additional review to make sure it fits and complies with the neighborhood that it's being deployed in.
I have one other quick question. This is just for me to understand the process better. It seems that engaging in the industry in this process, maybe in a less formal format, would have let us know that, for instance, 5 feet just was not ever going to be enough. Is there a way that you can engage them, stay fair to everybody, keep it open, but get that level of detail so that as you're writing this, it really reflects what can be done? It can be pushed.
So what we were just talking about was that we don't believe that there would be enough time to do that and come back on the 24th. If the direction is for us to do that work, we can. We just won't be able to have this back before the commission probably until perhaps July-ish or so.
Is there a reason, there a timeline for us to do it by the 24th?
Well, these poor folks have been waiting for a very long time.
They really want it done.
A lot of different.
Yeah, but we got to do it right too, though, right? I mean, I think that there's a balance. There's clearly a balance there, right, between getting it right. Otherwise, we're going to be getting here and having meetings that aren't going to be productive either.
Correct.
So in a really informal way, I would be saying to the universe, it would be smart if you were one of the industry vendors to write to you the criteria that would work well for them. So that you could consider it as you're working on this versus having individual planning sessions, which would delay the next meeting.
That could work too. Maybe if the universe wrote to us in the next week or two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'd like to make sure that we're incorporating the whole industry, right? They're not just a few players, right? So that'd be the only thing. I don't know if we reached out to everybody or how everyone's been informed on it.
Yeah, the whole industry got to hear this if they were paying
No, they're
attention.
not all here, though. There's 2 providers.
But it's recorded.
But the universe was made aware of it.
The universe just was made aware of it, yes.
Does that seem like a good direction from the commission to proceed?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can certainly, now that we've come to the commission, I do feel more comfortable reaching out and meeting with the folks that are doing these facilities. So I think probably either letters or conference phone calls or even meetings. I think we can make that work. So give me a call.
We have.
Yes, I know.
Commissioner Holman, do you have any comments?
I agree with what our fellow commissioners have stated. I might suggest, much like architectural guidelines, where you actually have a drawn document of your antenna arrays, because as multiple tiers, they say if it fits this criteria, run straight through without a lot of red tape per se. I'm not opposed to, I understand the 6-foot clear between the bottom of the array and the power source. Antenna could be anywhere from 4 to 6 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
I think you need to cap it at the top somewhere. If it's 12 feet, so be it. But cap it.
Yeah.
I'm in agreement. You heard my comments about the standalone poles, so I'm not going to repeat that. But also the underground installation of equipment. I read in AT&T's letter, they're worried about unlawful discrimination. But if the county wishes to, when practical and feasible, to underground in vaults the equipment, be sure that the language is so it's non-discriminatory, that it applies to all vendors, utilities, that if we're going to ask the wireless community to, where practical, to put things in underground vaults, that applies to all other applications as well. So don't want to get caught up in the unlawful discrimination claim, per se.
Peter?
I'm in concurrence with the fellow commissioners that, if we can resolve kind of those issues then and see those proposals move and streamline a process, I'm very comfortable with seeing that come back.
Great. Steph, do you feel like you have enough direction from us tonight?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. This was helpful and appreciated everyone coming down to kick this off. So.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Any other comments? Great. Thank you. Call our next item, please.
Next item, number 6, is the planning director's report.
I actually do not have a report. We are going to have our June 10th meeting. We have a number of items that we're looking at bringing for that meeting. And so other than that, don't have much of a report.
I would like to point out that this is the only meeting we have this month, so no other meetings in the month of May.
Well, it was
No Memorial Day meetings.
Thank you for that.
All right. I do not see any other public comments, so this meeting is adjourned.